Welcome to the Training Ground Guru podcast in association with Genius Sports. In every episode, we bring you insights into the teams behind the teams in professional football. Coming up on today's episode.
Because it's an exciting challenge for Brentford, everyone's pumped to try to see how far we can go in the next 6 games, give it a shot, and if it doesn't work out, well, we'll try again next year.
I'm Simon Austin from Training Ground Guru, and our guest on this episode is Ben Ryan. Ben is the Performance Director of Premier League side Brentford, responsible for making sure that the club's players are mentally and physically equipped for matchday. Prior to joining the Bees 4 years ago, Ben consulted with a number of leading organisations and was head coach of Fiji's Rugby Sevens team, leading them to Olympic glory in 2016. In this episode, Ben told me how someone from a rugby background landed a top job in football, what it's like to work with head coach Keith Andrews, and about the club's secret supremacy rating. We hope you enjoy this episode, and if you do, please give us a follow via your preferred podcast provider. We're here at your Jersey Road training ground. I wanted to start with if you could just tell us a little bit about what's here and the facilities you have to start with.
Yeah, sure. Well, we're actually in the old cricket pavilion, which when I joined 4 years ago, this is where we were basically. On the other side, Phil Giles had a little room that was basically in the boiler room. It was really hot in there, and I was next door, and we ate here, and we had some of the gym equipment was in here. It was all very piecemeal, and then obviously we moved across to the other side. And it's slowly been kind of expanded over the last few years because the academy's come online, and so kind of over your right shoulder is the academy buildings, and then we've got 12 pitches over your left shoulder, most of which are hybrids, and then we've got a dome that's under construction as well to push towards that Category 1 status, and then we've got the training facility on the other side where the under-18s, the B team and the first team are there, and we've got everything across there from where we eat to where we train, where we recover. A few things that probably we can bolt on. So, we've added this year. We've added a big sauna that was bespoke. We've added a swimming pool that's made out of a shipping container, and we've done it a little bit the Brentford way, really. If there's been a need, and if we know it's going to move the needle, then we're gonna make those changes. So yeah, it's a nice compact space.
And I've visited quite a few training grounds now, and there's always quite a big debate about giving the players too much and pampering them too much. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, we talk about it quite a lot, really, because in as a principle, if you do give them absolutely everything and then you get into a Premier League game where you're expecting them to make decisions and yet their whole day, week, month has been given to them on a plate, you just have to try to widen the options for those players so that you don't give them everything, and try and find those opportunities to chuck in a bit of resilience. And also it's around standards. So we don't have expectation from our players that everything's delivered to them on a plate. There's stuff that they have to do for themselves. But saying that, in an elite environment where time's quite precious, that when they come in, it's important that the chefs know exactly what they should be having for breakfast and for lunch and for their snacks and for taking home, that the kit's appropriate, that the meetings run well, that the therapists make sure that they all have time to have that individual treatment time with the players. So there's still always going to be in any elite organisation in sport a high degree of service towards the athletes, but it's bespoke. And we don't go over the top on all of that, and we make it really clear around our standards of creating a positive culture that it's not there's not a feeling on the other side where there's a them and us. That the players and the staff interact all the time on a regular basis.
And what does your role as performance director involve?
Yeah, it's a good question, really, because performance directors in other Premier League clubs, when we chat to each other most of the time, have very different remits. And the traditional performance directors looking after a couple of departments, sports science and medical. So, how do you get your players fit? Are they fit and ready to do what we want them to do? And when they get injured, do we get them back quickly? And my remit is is far broader. So yeah, I look after those as well as the performance and the S&C. But performance touches so many different areas. So whether it's operations, team operations, player care, the data and technology, research. We've got 11 PhDs running here, and innovation, all the catering and nutrition, and the external services that you'd have from the different social sciences, the kit, the logistics. It's quite wide. I think it's about 9 departments in total really here. And then with Lee and with Keith, we sit underneath Phil as director of football, and we're in that kind of senior on-field group as well that then link into off-field, and John Varney and the CEO and the board and all the other various things. And it's really flat. The hierarchy is great. And it really is a top organisation to be working for. But yeah, that's kind of my day to day. So it's, I don't know how many meetings I'd have in a day and all the different conversations, but they'll be so varied. It's important, I think, for a performance director. And my role, it's not really a performance director. It's kind of a hybrid role that you understand exactly what's going on, and then you can make sure that everything's connected and aligned, because often you get these pinch points at elite levels of sport between coaching, medical and performance. It's a common triangle where if things aren't done well, you might have a coaching group that veers more towards the medical or more towards the performance, depending on relationships and styles. And so to have somebody in my role that can make sure that everyone's communicating, we're having high quality conversations all the time, everyone's aligned, we can have plenty of debate and talk through lots of different things. But once there's an agreement there, then we've got that alignment. That's really, really important, because often that's where things can break down in organisations.
And I know there's probably not such thing as a typical day in your role, but what would you be doing today, for example?
Today would be, let's have a look, 7:30 in. I was in today, catching up on a few bits of admin and sign off a few POs, and then I think it was 8 o'clock we'd have our first PEG, which is a performance executive group. So myself, the head of performance planning, head of medical and head of sports science, sit down, have a look at some of the numbers around the players and the training that's going to be today and any nuances. So we've got alignment. We then go into the coaches group meeting that we've expanded this year. So I think there's 17 people in our coaching group, which will be all the first team coaches. And then that group that I just talked about, as well as our player care general manager now, Barney, who's brilliant, and Reece Weston, who's equally brilliant, who's our head of team operations. But again, both those two have a much wider remit than their job title suggests. And we'll have Josh Hiller in there, who's the guy that will put the cones and the kit out on the pitch. So everyone has that alignment. We'll walk through the modifications that might be being put in place for the players, anything else that's popped up overnight. We would have had some of the players, the early ones that were reporting if they've got any niggles or injuries that we need to look at. Then we'll go through the practices for the day. Today we're on an extensive day today, so it's a big volume day with plenty of intensity. And we'll go through all of that. Ben Cousins, who's our head of performance planning, I don't think there's too many clubs that have a head of performance. In fact, there isn't anybody in the Premier League that's head of performance planning. He's got his PhD in GPS, but he really understands some of the loads. So we'll always direct some of the questions to Ben and talk about, is that enough? And Ben might say, can you take 30 seconds off this, or how about this? And obviously then we're capturing the load. And then after that, then I go into a combined medical performance, which is a wider group, where again we'll tell everybody what's happening at training, and then they'll talk about what they're doing post-training as far as the S&C and the extra work that they're doing in the gym, as well as individual work-ons. We'll have that, and then I caught up with Reece and Barney just to go through some of the logistics for the next few days and some planning. We've got a planning meeting later that will look at the next 6 weeks. Every fortnight we have a couple of hours planning meeting where we'll look at the next 2 weeks in absolute granular detail. Weeks 3 and 4 as a bit more of a broader scope, and then 5 and 6 to give us some perspective. And again, all of these things, it sounds like I've got hundreds of meetings because we've got training in the middle of that. And today I'm hanging out with you guys for a bit as well. And then at the back end of that, we've got a couple of other meetings that one's around some staff recruitment, and then we've got I've got another call with an external consultant, and then I'll roll out the building later on today. But my point about meetings is like they're clear, they're short, they're interactive. We create simple guardrails where everyone's got a voice, and there's no stupid suggestions. But they're tight, and it just means because on the back end after training, we reverse a lot of our meetings. So then we'll have a coaches meeting at the back end to see how everything's gone, review. We'll do the same for the performance and medical. So you're probably adding 14, 15, 16 meetings, really short and sharp. And it's going back to, again, high quality conversations. We're not missing things. We've got security, safety catches to make sure that no one's getting overcooked from the loading. There's nothing that's missing information that's going to be vital for us in the following days. So they don't burn you out, they give you energy. And we put that in place far more rigidly this year than we had done in previous seasons. And we've had so much change this year that it was, obviously a threat because we've got so many different people and voices and changes, but it was also an opportunity to have a look at the framework, make some modifications, change the way we train. We've changed our training model, we changed our working week, we have a day off at a different time. We use our different load metrics now. We're chasing different metrics at the higher end around some of the Excel and decel stuff that I won't bore you with, and that's all been wrapped into everything. So it's there's a lot going on, but it's a really varied and fun day, if I'm honest with you.
And you were talking about those changes. Have they come in this season under the new head coach?
Yeah, they have. Yeah, there was a couple of things that we slowly changed last year. So what would be a good example? Post-game lifting. So something that I've seen a lot more of other teams doing this year, finish a game, and the boys are doing some gym work in the changing room and quite heavy. The NBA kind of pioneered it on the basic premise that on a high day, make it a high day. You've got so many games. The one thing that normally gets marginalised is their work in the gym. It's also that one thing that kind of historically in football they've seen as less of a connection between playing well on the pitch and lifting weights. But we've had a real push on making our players stronger and more robust and resilient. And we want to develop players. And sometimes some of the stuff they do in the gym won't make a huge amount of difference in the next few weeks, but it will over the coming seasons. So that was a smaller change that we made last year. But yeah, the training schedule, the meeting setups, the metrics that we're using, bringing Ben Cousins in as head of performance planning. He'd probably like to be a director. Has all come in place. There's probably a few other things as well. Yeah, and it was a chance to freshen things up. Thomas is an amazing man, a great manager, and every head coach likes to do things slightly differently. And he'd been here a long time, and there are some things that we wanted to freshen up, and last summer gave us the chance on a really short runway because everything happened really quickly over the summer. So there's lots of things we look back now going, we made a couple of errors here in pre-season, maybe didn't have enough minutes here, we didn't do enough here. There's a few other things we didn't do in the individual players on their off-season training. So we're reflecting on all of that as well and thinking, right, okay, well, where can we kick on again for next season?
And I think you're one of the few staff who worked under Thomas Frank, who is still now here because a lot left with Thomas. Yeah. Have there been a lot of changes more widely under Keith?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at, I suppose, those go back to that triangle of coaching, medical and sports science, we've probably, we lifted across from the academy 3 staff that came into the performance and medical, 4 actually, and that's been great because the academy can see there's a pathway, and all of those staff have landed beautifully. And so yeah, we've had some additional roles and some changes in roles in S&C and performance. We've added a couple of physios. We've also changed some roles and responsibilities around things. So yeah, and then on top of that, we've had some new coaches that have come into that first team group. So we're probably touching double digits probably for the amount of staff that we've brought in, and then obviously the knock-on effect both into the academy but in the wider group. And we have probably naturally had to expand our staff as well. There's this is almost a 7-day a week now. We're here more than we were last year. On our +1s, on our off days, we're in here more for recovery and for some other planning. So numbers have increased quite a lot. I'm sure we're nowhere near some of the top teams and their staffing, but we've probably doubled in the last 18 months across the club as a whole. So it's when you have that much growth, you've really got to be on top of making sure that like all the staff you're bringing in add value and they're doing something specific, and B, we've still got that alignment and that bit that I've referred to before around, like it's quite a flat leadership model. So the owner, Matthew, the director of football, Phil, and John, the CEO, and Lee as director. These guys know everybody else in the building, and we don't want to lose that touch, because I think it's a real superpower for Brentford. So yeah, a ton of changes really.
And it's well documented, a lot of pundits were tipping Brentford for relegation because of those changes in the summer. Did you always think that Keith would be able to be a success and would hit the ground running like he has?
It's a good question, because I just reflected back on all of that change, and then you add on to that, we're not got the biggest budgets. We're down the bottom end of that for it's still compared to all the other roles I've had, we still have budgets that are absolutely good enough to make sure that they don't become a limitation to what we want to achieve. But with all those moving parts, there's a bit of nervousness. But Keith was brilliant last year in the building, and when the opportunity came for him to put his hand up for this role, it was a very obvious choice to me certainly, that he would add huge value. He's been brilliant. He's not lost the values that we have at Brentford. He's continued a lot of all that stuff. He's put in his own twist in things. He's very open and inclusive, and he knows his mind as well. And he's brought a lot of energy. So you can't ever be sure, because football's random. And we started the season a bit undercooked. A few players hadn't got back into the building and weren't fit enough, and we were pretty average against Forest in that first game of the season, and suddenly, like that relegation conversation looked pretty real. But internally, we knew that there was always going to be a little bit of a hiccup as we changed our physical model, our training model, and everything else. And with that, you always get a little bit of damage. Nothing much. We had a few injuries that were 3-4 day injuries that we knew we were going to get, and we predicted it. And we kind of predicted that we'd also get out of it pretty quickly. And that's exactly what happened. Everyone kept the faith. It was a testament to the culture that whilst in those first couple of weeks we got a couple of injuries, we got an injury every day for the first 4 days. And you can imagine then the coaches like, well, what's happening here? Who's going to be left in a couple of weeks' time? And it was the fact that we'd already predicted that, and we'd said to everybody, look, this is going to happen, but don't worry, none of them are going to be significant, and we're going to get the benefits of getting them fitter and more robust, and just hold the line, hold the faith. And everyone did, stuck together, and then we put ourselves in a really good position to where we are now, knowing that you constantly got to be hungry, and things can change really quickly. So Keith's been brilliant. It's been a top year, really enjoyed it, and there's a good buzz about the club at the moment.
And it seems to be a big thing with Brentford that you can change the personnel, but the overall ethos doesn't change, and the performances on the pitch don't really change either, and they even get better.
Yeah, you would hope, and this is definitely the case, that with Thomas and Keith, they put their own flavour on things, and some of their personality, is reflected in how we play. Because for both of them, though, they do have a terrific work ethic, and those standards are high. Outside of all of that is the stuff that you've probably talked about a lot with, the way that Phil and Matthew have run the club, and the underlying principles that we adhere to. And you touched upon it, that data is incredibly important to us, and we hope that we use it in a clever way. But the human touch in what we do, I think, is equally important at Brentford. And I think maybe that gets lost sometimes in some of the narrative around Brentford. But Matthew and Phil in particular, but all of the senior staff here have time for everybody, are personable, are down to earth, and are open and want to grow. And I think that's as much as part of our success as some of the data.
And I heard a podcast that you did last year that was very good with Dan Bigger, and you were talking about, I think, the supremacy index, was it, that Matthew Benham has? And I'd never heard of that before. Yeah. So I wondered if you could just explain a bit more about that, please.
Yeah, so we have our own internal statistical model, I guess, that a number of us will get every week that gives us a number on actually how we're performing in relation to the rest of the league. And it takes away the randomness. It's a low-scoring game. You lose games you shouldn't, and you win games you shouldn't. And we look at the wider performance, and within that model, you can get stuck into the granular detail of where, in particular, things are going well or not so going well. And it means that you don't get knee-jerk reactions. We've had that supremacy rating go up after losing, and we've had it go down after winning. So it just gives you a really good chance to take a break, a breath, reflect, look at things with a far more considered eye. And I think in any sport, but particularly in football, where you're kind of mark to market every week, and how people come in on the Monday after the Saturday is largely down to how we've done at the weekend. Emotions and decision making can sometimes fall too heavily on that side of things. And so this is one of the tools that we have that gives us that chance to take a breath and actually look at things more strategically.
Do you know what feeds into that index? What metrics go into it?
I do, yeah. Yeah. It's a brilliant metric, but yeah, within that, I think that there's other stuff that as a club we keep to ourselves, especially since, you're far better off talking to some of the quant analysts at Smart Odds or Phil or Matthew around some of the data stuff. I've learned a huge amount since I've been here around all of that. But looking for those pieces of data that actually make a difference to how we play is underlying it all, really, because sometimes there's things that are measured and seem to have a higher weighting of importance than actually they do for the game and for how we want to play. So that's kind of that I suppose is the closest information I get to tell you that we're clear about what we're looking for.
Because I found that in football, often clubs only look at one metric, which is the results.
Yeah.
And that is where long-term plans can get ripped up and short-termism comes in if you're having a run of 3 defeats, for example. So that does seem a really powerful thing about Brentford and what you do.
Yeah, it is. You can't get away from it. We can't say, oh, well, look, our supremacy rating puts us at 15th and we finish at 18th and we get relegated. The Premier League aren't gonna suddenly change a decision. So you still have to look at that, and that there's positions in the league that equal European places and financial gain as well as relegation and everything else. So yeah, of course it's incredibly important, but it's not what drives the internal decisions on actually what's going on as far as our performance is concerned. They're the genuine chances to reflect and see how we can get better.
And you talked about development earlier, and I thought that was really interesting because you've had a lot of top strikers have moved on: Ollie Watkins, Ivan Toney, Mbeumo, Wissa. And then you've got Igor Thiago, who's come in and done brilliantly this season. And Matthew Benham, I think he talked about how he looks at chances created for strikers more than the number of goals they're scoring. And I'm guessing that the development part is what comes in after that. That's what he means. So, yeah, I was just wondering, is it a massive focus for you, and how do you go about that development from a physical perspective?
Yeah, it's definitely a big focus for us, for all the players in the building, to make them better. And that is around everything around their game, but obviously it's linked into the parts of the game that we want them to get better at and what we think will help them become more of a threat and a better player. So it's not just a general, right, well, we're going to make him stronger and faster and everything else. It's all relative to what we think they need, and they're all part of that conversation. And with the huge amount of data now that's coming into clubs, the recruitment world is becoming so competitive that the differences between getting those players, some of which you talked about over the last few years, is getting increasingly harder. And one of the key things now that clubs are going to need to do is, when players get into the building, yes, you might have players at another club that are a few % better in these metrics and this and that, but really it's then about, well, how can you add value both in the way you play, and the way you measure what you play for those players and where you play them and how you play them, but then also how do you improve those players from a performance availability metric, which we have here. So it's not just about, well, we got 15 players available this weekend or 25. It's about, well, they're available, but they can play to this physical metric that's linked into our game model. And so Fulham at the weekend and how they play in their style, and what's the worst case scenario that you will have as a single pivot to play against Fulham over 90 minutes, and are they at that level? And then beyond that is then, well, what do they need to be at the next level, and what areas do we need to help them get better at, and whether that's longer term stuff around their diet or their sleep, or it might be around some of their strength work. All of those things, we put a big onus on, because that's where the value lies, is adding that to those players, so we get them in the building where we make them better. We'll try to.
Yeah. And we had Phil Giles on the podcast a few years ago, and he was talking about how important staff recruitment is as well, and looking beyond your networks.
Yeah.
So I suppose you're a great example of that, having come from rugby union before. So yeah, I was wondering if you could just tell us how the move came about.
Yeah,
but I know you're a Brentford fan, aren't you? And
I am.
Grew up near the training ground.
Yeah, and there's that. And I think initially, I guess that's one of the reasons I'm here, but not because of necessarily that immediate connection. So yeah, I was coaching Fiji, left, worked for a few years doing different consultancy. I was with the French Federation, the rugby team for a long time, and UK Sport and Nike and different teams. And then I got invited after the Olympic Games by Dean Smith to come in and chat to the players about my story. He knew that I was a Brentford fan. So I came and met them here, just a few yards away from here in their meeting room, and a few of the players reached out to me after that, and we had carried on having conversations and helped one or two of them on their journeys. And over that time period, loosely kept in touch with Brentford. I was doing other work in other football clubs around the world, and actually spent a year at Wimbledon with Mark Robinson, and loved it. I love AFC Wimbledon. It's a brilliant club, great people, and that kind of gave me a taste again for wanting to look at what opportunities there might be in football. I think we have it a lot easier in rugby for culture. It's generally international rugby, like take Fiji. The boys all came from very poor backgrounds. They're all Fijian. They all grew up in the same areas, same things. We don't have transfer windows, and we don't have agents, and we don't have head coaches getting sacked, and we don't have international breaks, and we don't have major competitions at the end of the summer. It's complicated, the football landscape, and I find that like incredibly challenging in a good way. And then Phil rang me and said, look, we're looking at putting this position in place. Don't know if you'd be up for it. And I said, yeah, I would. And then went through the process, and then he appointed me. And I think, we've appointed a mix of people that are from inside and outside football, really. You can't get away from having a good core of football. You have to. But having those different ways of thinking and coming from different experiences, we've got a good example, in our performance department, we've got Paddy, who was head of performance for the Atlanta Hawks in the NBA and was in the AFL. We've got Robbie, who was head of performance for London Irish in the Prem in rugby. We've got Toby, who was head of performance for Sydney Kings in basketball, and previously was across in a Super Rugby. And then we've got others that have been. We've got a head of sports science, former head of sports science at Chelsea and Wolves in there as well. We've got a ton of experience from lots of different angles, and the medical department's got a similar story as well. So I like that. I like that different flavour to people's thinking, because then we look at solutions to problems in a slightly different way, and we still have that very steady mix of football as well. So and in the leadership group, it's the same. Me, Keith, Lee, and Phil have very different characters, and it's a nice blend. And Phil thinks about that, and we do various things. We do risk compass testing, so we look at how we see risk, and that's quite important. If you've got a group of staff that are picking the team and they're all very pragmatic and conservative, then when we've got to make a change for 15 minutes to go and they all think, right, well, let's go defensive, then that blend's maybe not quite right. And now you might not suddenly change a coach because they think like that, but at least it gives you insight into looking at behaviours. And Phil's very, very good at that, and Matthew to get that blend and have that kind of overriding view that anybody is able to say anything to anybody if they've got a good idea and not get shut down. And we've had plenty of good ideas from every level of staff at the club. I think again that adds to that positivity around the culture here.
Everyone is looking for a new edge. To find it, you need fresh perspectives. Our sponsor, Genius Sports, uses advanced AI, unique mesh tracking data, and tactical video to help analysts and coaches see and understand the game from every possible angle. This includes player POVs from the 3D recreation tool that sits within their performance studio, already being used by top clubs in the Premier League, Ligue 1, Pro League, and more. Genius pairs football's most extensive tracking data set ever with multiple automatically synced video angles for the fastest, smartest insights. Join the world's top clubs and find your new edge today. Learn more at www.geniussports.com/TGG.
And it seems that Fiji rugby was chalk and cheese with Premier League football.
Yeah, completely different. I mean, I went unpaid for 6 months. I put petrol in the minibus. We didn't have any money. Our kit that we played in the World Championships with was the same kit we trained in. So, we'd get constant complaints from World Rugby saying your kit looks too dirty. It's like, well, it's the only piece of kit we have. But we blended a group there that, for me, was a really good reset coming from UK sport, really, a background in sports science and then coaching and teaching and working through different sports, where it was very much kind of science-led. Budgets were pretty decent. You're doing tech projects with Nike on. We had the tight shirts. I was the first coach to use GPS in world team sports back in 2006. Clive Woodward was the head coach of the test team. He'd used the GPS for one session. The coaches didn't like them on the back of the neck for scrummaging, so he put them in a cupboard that happened to be my office when I joined. I started using them, and so I was quite heavily around that data and technology and looking for those kind of, I don't like using the word marginal gains, but gains. And then you go to Fiji where there's nothing. It really gives you clarity on how do you create and sustain a world-class environment, because it isn't about the cash. It's about standards, values, conversations, and directing what money you do have into those moments that will make the biggest gains. And so with Fiji, we ended up being highly successful and winning everything that we could, and it kind of planted firmly in my philosophy that working together, doing things collaboratively with alignment is absolutely crucial, not just about gaining success, but sustaining it. We're in that phase still with Brentford, and I still think it's incredibly important there that Fijian, they call it vela money, but working together, you cannot lose sight of that. And if in clubs, and I've seen it uncountable times really, that you suddenly get silos. When pressure comes, suddenly medicals start withdrawing, pointing fingers about an injury or performance or the coaches do, and then you start getting disconnection, and then before you know it, you're starting to tumble the wrong way. So understanding that landscape, joining everything up, me being one of those voices that helps to make sure that everybody is aligned and let them do their thing, is crucial, and it just changes daily. So you can't just sit back, and I can't go back and Phil, we've nailed this. Everything's good. Don't worry about it. It's all perfect, because tomorrow morning it could be a very different story. So lots of lessons I learned in Fiji. I'm very grateful for my time there.
And some of what you encountered would have been a real eye-opener for Premier League performance staff, wouldn't it? So I remember that story about the player and the pan au chocolat at breakfast.
Yeah, that was my first week. A guy called Moses Mawalu. We were in Dubai, actually, which is a place for Fijian, a crazy place. It wasn't as bad as when we went to Vegas. But, yeah, we're in the hotel, and he's got, I think it was about 10 pan au chocolats, 10 fried eggs on top of it. And I was like, Moses, what are you doing? He said, what's wrong about this? It's like bread good, eggs good, and you don't know what you don't know. And like in Fijian culture, there's this thing, Senga Mataka no tomorrow. So they don't know what's around the corner. So, a buffet at breakfast, they get cleaning that place out because they don't know if there's going to be any food tomorrow. And they played rugby like that. They play in the moment. So they're a bit like the Brazilian footballers in the 70s where, the risky pass, the joy in playing, that was because they're in the moment. They didn't think about where that pass might go. And that led us to like holding on to that as a superpower and then putting some good standards around everything. So every environment you look for trampolines, I call them, like applying what I consider to be Pareto's principle. So 80% of your success is around 20% of the things you do. Find those within individuals and with departments and the team. Jump on them as a trampoline almost to accelerate your performance and wrap other stuff around it. And so with Fiji Loa, my line manager was a convicted murderer and the military dictator was my boss. We had a cyclone and we had lots of other things that were happening. So I learned lots of lessons in lots of different ways in Fiji, but I'm massively grateful for stuff like that. And it came at a time in my career where I was kind of turning into this pretty average coach practitioner that was relying too much on all of that other stuff and not on actually helping human beings be their best versions. And kind of, it's never lost me, and I hope it will never lose me, that is my job, helping people be their best version, helping a team be their best version, standing in the shadows, pushing those guys to do their thing, and understanding that you don't know everything and let people do their thing. And I think we do that pretty well at Brentford.
It seems that there's a lot that people could learn from Fiji, though, in terms of the togetherness, the culture, and also the joy of playing.
Oh, without a doubt. The robustness and resilience around things. There's been a few occasions that I've had conversations here when a player's maybe been moaning about something, and like when you're with players that have had their house destroyed by a cyclone and then they're in the following day for national training and they're like, well, we'll find a way, we'll go on to the other side of the island, live with our cousins. When we've got enough money, we'll slowly start building things up. And you go to a village where they've had a tidal wave and salt water's destroyed all their crops and they've got to find another way to make a living in that village for the next 5 or 6 years. And they've got a smile on their face and they've got a real gratefulness. Or you're getting off a plane and you're seeing our players suddenly taking all the baggage off the carousels for other people that are waiting for their bags, and then no one's asked them to. They're not doing it for a social media clip or anything like that. They're doing it because they know that's the right thing. And our culture was help each other, look after everybody, and for them that meant anybody. And it allowed us to have this very robust culture where you have, I see it a lot in elite sport, where you want everybody to be over competent, right? You want anything you get thrown at them, like for our next league game, anything that gets thrown at our boys, we can deal with. There's nothing, you want that. But when you get teams that are highly competent like that, they sometimes get a little bit carried away and get overconfident. And when you get that mix wrong, you take your foot off the gas, you take your eye off the ball of some of the basic, the fundamentals, and you start falling away again. And it's another thing that you just got to keep on top of, because it's a fine margins. You want to breed confidence, but you don't want to get them cocky. You don't want to get them ungrateful. You don't want them to forget why they're here in the first place. We have a little board of hexagons as you go out of the training room onto the pitches. That's a picture of them when they were like 7 or 8 years old and playing football for the first time. And the initial time that they put that hexagon in, They explain the photo, say why why it was taken, why they started football, who helped them on their journey, and it just reminds them that even on their bad days, where they've been dropped, they picked up an injury, we're on a losing streak, they walk past that, and it's their 9-year-old self, like, to be able to reflect back and tell that 9-year-old self, look, you're going to be a Premier League footballer one day. It's kind of cool, and it gives them that kind of take a breath. Let's control what we can control, and be a bit more grateful for everything that we've got. And again, like, these are things I'm sure other clubs have variations on all of that, but we want to keep our players and our staff grounded.
And you mentioned that you were one of the first teams to use GPS with England Rugby. But I know you're not necessarily a huge fan of it, are you? Or you
No.
don't think everything should be ruled by it?
No, I don't. In many ways, at the moment, it's the most consistent yardstick for some of the load. And I haven't come across anybody in sport like Ben Cousins, who we have here, that has set up a model that he did with our B team. They played like 70 games last year. They didn't get any soft tissue injuries. A lot of it was down to his model and his understanding of this. And we've applied his model to the first team, and we've got really high availability, and our numbers around what we can do are as good as we've ever had. However, it's not as accurate as you want it to be, and there's other things that we can use to measure, and LiDAR and accuracy around high metrics like XL decels. Nobody still knows how many times kicking a football affects injury or fatigue. You know, we come off start pre-season, and you might have, we slowly build up what they're doing from sprinting and output stuff, but they might suddenly kick the football 1,000 times in that week, and we don't have any. We're doing a PhD on this at the moment, but there's other metrics that can affect performance and fatigue and injury. But at the moment, everybody has that. I think we'll slowly move away from it, but it gives us a good indicator. But it doesn't mean that you don't have these case studies where, Joe's got injured. We've looked back, we've done a review. All his GPS is perfect. All his bloods are perfect. His screening is perfect. His diet, everything's good. He's still got injured. And there's still things that you don't know. And the little nudges that we have as a group to go, do you know what? Today I think we need to turn this down. Even though his metrics say this, there's a few signs here that I have no measurements for, but we just feel. And I think, again, if you have an open environment where no one's getting pointed at and no one's going like, he said that person should do that or shouldn't do that, and they've got injured or they haven't. That we don't have that. Then we have those conversations that also involve the art as well. But I see the benefits of it, but I don't think in 5 years' time, 10 years' time, probably 5, we're going to be talking about it at the level that we currently do.
And another theme that's come through on the website is players being probably over-monitored and it taking the joy out of playing football and training a little bit. Yeah,
it's a valid question, I think. Like if you look at the monitoring that we have, because you touched upon the GPS, the IMUs are little monitors that we can put in boots, and various other things can measure some other stuff. We have heart rate as well. They'll have saliva and bloods that will measure various metrics, as well as some of the other fundamentals that we use. It's a lot. And if you're a player that particularly can get dragged into looking at the metrics, then you can get lost in some of the key aspects of your performance that is more important. So you have to look at the signal, and there's a lot of noise in data. You have to look at the signal, and then you can filter that down to some of the more important metrics. Because you're absolutely right. It's only going one way. There's more and more numbers coming in. We're very aware of that. But you also can't just give one number, but you don't want to give 100 either. So you have to find a balance with the players on what information they want and what information you want to give them to help improve their performance, and point out sometimes where, in relation to some of the other players or in relation to the top players in the league, they might be ahead or below, and how we can help them get to those, because it's not about getting your numbers up, it's about being able to create more chances, get more interceptions, get under the ball a bit more, make more of those forward runs, be available for more minutes. That will all be linked into their minutes. So nothing can be in isolation. And I see massive value in data, but it's got to be used appropriately.
And Michael Caulfield, who I know is part of your department, he's done quite a few bits for us, and he's talked about the power of play and how important that is. So is that a very important aspect for you as well?
There's certainly some fundamentals that you have to put in place. There's some things that you need to do to make sure everybody understands what's going on and has that alignment. But if you have, long, laborious meetings where players can't connect to what they're doing, to their output and their performance, and everything's rigid, everything's directed, then you're never going to get a group that are working hard. And you look at a matrix of formal, informal, structured, unstructured, and you make sure you get those blends. We create touch points in the building where players sit and chat and sit with staff. We're expanding one area for next season where we're creating a much larger kind of first team cafeteria area that's really just for opportunity to chat, and we'll throw in a barista in there as well, and they'll have a nice area. But those chances to take a breath and have a bit of fun. They do a lot of stuff together as well, off and with staff. There's a lot of traits that you'll see in the building where you won't think, they're not. They might not look that professional because they might be messing around a bit too much. I mean, there was a moment in beginning of the season where staff and a couple of very top end players were trying to chip a ball into a paper cup down the corridor, and they were there for 3 hours. Now, as a with my sports science hat on, I go, there's probably not appropriate load to be just with. I think there's 6 of them that were rotating shot after shot, and it was over 3 hours. I think they left at about 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. But one of them eventually nailed it, and they talked about that for the next 3 or 4 days, and there was a real added to togetherness. So, to Michael's point, it's a good example of that was purely play. Nothing was put in or rigid, but it adds to the culture around things, and we do create clear guardrails. So this is what's expected from our players and our staff. Everyone agrees it. These are our standards. These are what we expect. But within that, we have to allow the freedom for them to be themselves, be authentic, do their thing. And I think we create that space that's not too narrow so that they feel suffocated and they say they give us autonomy, but then it's only a choice of the green or the purple broccoli. Or it's too wide where they're they never keep an eye on us. They don't know if we're in the gym or not, or whether we're out with our mates tonight. You have to constantly get those guardrails right in agreement with the players. And I think we do that well. So it does allow everybody to fully appreciate the journey as well as just being on that conveyor belt.
Yeah, talking about the guardrails, I'd heard a nice analogy that you'd used before about going across a bridge and having the guardrails either side of those.
Yeah, so it was some work I did with another team, but we're talking about a bridge. It was the Firth of Forth Bridge, actually, and saying if anyone had driven over it, and they'd all driven over it, and said, okay, would you drive over it without the guardrails on the side? They're like, well, it's high up, it's windy, I got a nice car, probably wouldn't, or I'd go slowly down the middle. So, okay, how many of you have actually crashed into those guardrails when you've gone across it? And none of them had. And that's kind of how that key aspect of guardrails, that if you put your rules in, your standards in, your metrics in that are too tight, then you're going to suffocate people and they are going to crash into them because they're not going to enjoy them. And if you make them too wide, then they're going to veer all over the place. It's going to take them a long time to get to the end of that bridge. So that's my point around getting the right size to those guardrails so that you still have clarity and where you want to go, but within that you allow individuals to be individual. And the game of football requires those magical moments where you have that creativity. Culture requires personality, different opinions, different ideas. All of that comes from having the guardrails in place, but that space to be able to think, play, not be judged. And again, it goes back to that. You have to constantly reflect on that. And there might be moments in the season where you might need to go like that with one player or with the team, or there might be moments where you go like that. And you only know those moments by having, again, going back to the meetings and the high quality conversations, that if you do them right, won't sound boring, won't be that kind of conveyor belt, but will be all part of understanding where we are to help us be better, really.
You're vying for a European spot at the moment with not many games left.
Yeah.
How big a challenge will that be next season, having to factor in those extra games in midweek potentially? Yeah,
it will definitely be a challenge, and we've obviously been doing some work around that, from the basic fundamentals of when are they, where could they be, how does that affect squad, and then looking at it again with the Brentford lens to go, all right, there's a standard way of doing this, which is just we see it as more games and we just rotate a little bit more and we plan well, and then there's those curious questions around, well, how do we solve these problems to make, like, for example, how do we stop players getting burnt out, staff getting burnt out? How do we win games without increasing physical load and causing a chronic overload? How do we fit this into our season when we want to also to to get them increased time in the gym, and all of these things come into play. And we've had some really interesting conversations around that and thrown some very weird suggestions on the wall. And that's not because we're thinking, oh, we're going to be in Europe. It's just, it would be naive of us not to know, well, there's an option here. I think we're 10% chance of the Champions League, so it's a small chance, right? But there's still a chance, so why not go through that process? Because it might also throw out some other ideas that might be completely unrelated to Europe, that might have something to do with how we travel to away games next season. And so we're looking at all of that, and again, the Phils and Matthews of this world will have, I'm sure, and Lee will have some cracking ideas and Keith that will throw into all of that mix. Because it's an exciting challenge for Brentford. I think everyone's pumped to try to see how far we can go in the next 6 games. We know that we could finish right down the bottom here because it's so tight, but we've also got an opportunity to do something good and just give it a shot. And if it doesn't work out, well, we'll try again next year.
I spoke to Phil a few years ago, as I say, and he was talking about reopening the academy.
Yeah.
And I said, why are you doing it? He said, one of the big reasons is if we get in Europe, we have to have an academy at this level.
Yeah.
And some people ridiculed him for saying that, Brentford in Europe.
Yeah.
But it could be a reality.
Yeah, it could be. I get it why people say that, because people on a lot of levels don't particularly like change. They don't, the football is traditionally those big teams, that other ones coming up the rails, well, maybe they're just there for a little bit. The light will shine on them for a season or two, and then they'll drop down to where they should be. But we're seeing with a number of clubs in the Premier League that it's not the case. It's incredibly competitive, and we just want to give it a good shot, and we're realistic, but at the same time we feel that on a good day, we can beat anyone. And over a season, there's so many challenges to get consistent performances with a small group and a young group. We're one of the youngest squads in the league, but you embrace that and see where it will take us, and as long as you keep everyone's feet in the ground, don't get carried away, know that that all of this will be done with hard work and togetherness, then it will get us where it gets us, really. And we may not get into Europe this year, but we'll keep going, and we'll try to see where we can get some benefits to be better next year.
And I just wanted to ask a couple more questions, please. The first one was from one of our premium members called Michael Sapperstein.
Okay.
And he was just asking if you'd picked up any tips about set pieces, specifically from rugby union, that you've then brought into football.
Specifically to Brentford, I've had conversations with Stephen Rice, and before that with Bernardo, around some stuff. And again, stupid ideas. So it's corners. Are you allowed to lift anyone at a corner, like a line out? Answer, no, you're not, under regulations. Don't know if people know that. There's another thing that we used a lot in rugby is fast plays. So fast setups where you don't take your time. You just overload a defender, basically. You put more attackers in that space, and then that's your where your first point is, and then where your second touch would be in football parlance, you then put some more numbers. So you just quickly surprise. And I think all the stuff that's happened in various set piece stuff, there'll be across football in general. I think, again, going back to this point about data, that the analysis around opposition is so significant now that there will be a move towards surprise and chaos. And it might be slow because, again, change is difficult, but teams will slowly throw things at other teams that you won't have seen in the analysis, and that might be something around set piece, that might be around changes in formation, that might be within game multiple times, that might be your substitution tactics. There's a ton of different ways that I think that there's opportunity still in football, and I think on the back of all this, not over-reliance, over-analysis, surprise and chaos at some point will emerge as something that clubs will use more of.
Is that something Brentford have brought in this season under Keith, do you think, surprise and chaos? Has the style changed?
The style changed a little bit under Keith. He does want to create some chaos for the opposition. And there's been some stuff that he's applied, and there's stuff that I'm sure well, I know he would like to use in the future. And I think this first season where, everything was quick to put together, we went, right, well, what do we want to be good at? And let's get this nailed, and then we'll start putting the layers on top. And Keith's got some really interesting thinking around football, and that'll be, that I guess in the future there might be some changes there, but no, it's constantly comes up in our conversations around, well, what else can we do? Where are there opportunities? Every club must look at the same picture and think like that. We do it, and occasionally we might come up with a half decent idea, and most of the time we might come up with something where we'll have a chuckle about, and then someone else will bring it up in another 6 months. So yeah, having an open forum where again you throw those ideas and occasionally use them, and obviously we've got the B team and the academy where things get tried as well, as a bit of an incubation. So all these things that we hope to continue to develop, really.
And the final one, ambitions for yourself and ambitions for the club.
Oh, wow. I love it here. So that's my ambition. Keep walking in the door every day with a smile on my face. As long as I'm doing that, then I'm very happy at Brentford. And for the club, I think it's just to keep getting better, really. It is that straightforward. I think we've established ourselves, but it doesn't mean that suddenly we've got a guarantee that we're going to stay in the league. We're very aware that it's very competitive. Teams coming up will often come up with more resource than us, bigger crowds, more money behind them. So it's just about constantly getting better, and where that takes us, who knows? Because everybody's trying to do the same thing. But having that growth mindset, where I don't think at any point since I've been here anyone's ever thought, oh, we've done this now. They've always thought we can be better at this, we can be better at this, and we can be better at this. Doesn't mean you can't occasionally, say well done to people and enjoy the journey, but I think we will constantly be reflecting on, well, what's next? How can we get better?
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Ben.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Training Ground Guru podcast in association with Genius Sports. We'll be back next month with another episode.